Hey there. Do you want to learn how to stop beating yourself up? Today, I'm talking about the thoughts that we think and how mean we are to ourselves. So, how do you stop beating yourself up? First is notice your judgmental thoughts. How do you criticize yourselves? So, I want you to write those down because our brain is tricky, right? And we got to get it out of our brain and onto paper sometimes. So, what is the common ways that you criticize yourself? And this may be different in different areas of your life. So try looking at those different like roles individually. So because you're going to have different thoughts about different things. So for example, maybe work and business is different than motherhood, that is different from productivity, that is different from health, maybe even just your weaknesses overall. Like it can be big and grand or it can be very granular, like a specific instance. So right? Because if I look at like motherhood and how I judge myself in motherhood, it may be very different than how I judge myself about my weight or how I judge myself about my work ethic. Okay, so you can like separate those into categories, if you will. And there can be all different ones, but just realize like, how do I criticize myself in this area? And that we can like break that down even more. Or you may have, like I said, a big grand idea, like, how do I criticize myself about, like for me, like, oh, I'm so lazy. And I look at that and I can think of it in different ways. So write them all down, get them out of your head. What's that voice inside your head sound like? And if you don't have a voice, it's totally fine. But we all have a judge, whether it's a voice or you see it or however your brain functions. Nothing's wrong with you. Just know how does those judgments look? What do I think about myself? Okay. So, and then one of the things I like to do, I found that my clients like some, it works for some and not for others. Like I always say, take what you like, leave what you don't, but maybe giving that judgmental voice a name, right? So it can help to separate ourselves from these thoughts so we can tap into our executive brain. So for example, it's like if you name your judgmental voice the judge or like even George, right? Like you can name it whatever you want, or maybe it's some girl that you didn't like from middle school or whatever the case is. You can name it that voice that's like being mean to you, right? That can help, like I said, so we can like look at the different layers of our thoughts. So also knowing like intellectually that these thoughts don't make the situation better, that can be helpful. So a lot of times people will say, oh, it's not always about intellectualizing things. It's about feeling things and that's what makes it change. But I know for me personally, intellectualizing those things can help me realize that these harsh judgments, these criticisms about myself are actually not helpful, so that I can be like, oh yeah, this is not going to get me where I want to go. And then I can like help move through that. But we're going to talk about that in different ways. But knowing this can be very helpful. So it won't make you smarter if you like tell yourself you're dumb. It won't make you prettier if you tell yourself you're ugly. It won't make you healthier if you sit and tell yourself you're fat and lazy, right? So it won't make you put yourself out there if you're thinking like all these mean things about yourself. It does the opposite, right? We have shame. We tend to hide away. We eat worse. We don't take care of ourselves. We're not learning things, right? Like it doesn't actually serve us. So just realizing like when we see those thoughts, we're like, oh yeah, this isn't going to help me be healthier. This isn't going to help me run my business. This isn't right. As soon as we can intellectualize those things, sometimes that can help. But it doesn't mean that we need to then beat ourselves up about it. We're just like, oh, there's that thought, right? That doesn't serve me, right? It used to. All of these thoughts, you guys, I want you guys to know this. All of these thoughts probably did serve you at some point. Like that's why you picked them up, or somebody said them to you and that's why you picked them up. But just realize like, okay, maybe in the past it helped, but now it doesn't anymore. Okay. So, also validating your feelings can help. So for me, when I'm having like those critical thoughts of myself, it's helpful for me to say, yeah, I feel sad and hurt, or I'm scared of XYZ. Or, right, like we just can start feeling those, I'm really frustrated, right? Those things that can help to access our higher level thinking. Okay. So when we're like feeling into our body and we're like, yes, this is valid. I understand why I'm thinking these things, like they came from my parents or whatever the case is, right? Like it's understandable that I'm having these feelings. Nothing's wrong with me. That can help to calm our body instead of like, I can't feel this, right? We calm ourselves down, maybe some deep breathing. I always suggest that, right? And then coming back and asking ourselves questions like, what do I need now? Or what would be helpful for me right now? Right? Those kind of questions can help us access that higher level thinking. Okay. So, and that higher level thinking may sound like yourself, like how you would talk to a friend. Okay. So thinking about that a little bit, like that higher level thinking may be very friendly. And along with that, you maybe want to refer to yourself as in the third person, right? So like I was talking about before about giving that judgmental thought voice a name like George, this can help to like separate ourselves out from the situation and like look at it from that, like a friend, right? So I like to say, like, Ashley is having a hard time with this. She feels this. She thinks this about herself, right? So maybe Ashley's having a hard time in her work. She thinks that she's not smart enough because she's not having she's having a hard time doing her marketing, right? Whatever those things. And so then we can look at it like a friend. And we're like, oh, see, Ashley's going through this, right? And then talking to ourselves in that third person. So you're doing great. I know this is really hard and scary for you, but you're going to figure it out, right? Little things like that can be very helpful, right? We separate ourselves in and talk back to ourselves. Okay. You may even write down some of those thoughts that will combat the recurring negative thoughts that you have about yourself. Okay. So we wrote down what the judgmental thoughts, and now we want to come up with some thoughts that are going to be like, not necessarily in direct opposition. That's what a lot of us tend to do is we're like, oh, I'm so ugly, so I'm going to think I'm so beautiful. But that can feel like a lie a lot of the time. So one of the things that I like to do when it's something like I'm so ugly, right, would be like, there's one where you can work on like acceptance. For me, that's actually been really good and powerful. Like, yes, I know you think you're ugly and I know you feel you're ugly, but that's not true, right? Things like that. Very much like acceptance of those kinds of situations. Or it can even be like something like, it's okay to not look perfect, right? Or I look good enough to do what I need to do. Things like that. So they're adjacent, right? It's not all the way from I'm ugly to I'm beautiful, because my brain will be like reject that flat out. Doesn't matter how much of a mantra we say it over and over again. My brain is like, no, those things, right? So even like going from like, I'm not smart enough to I'm smart, maybe not the best and most useful way. For me, I've learned that I can just say, maybe I'm not smart enough and I'm okay with that. Now, what do I want to do? Just right. Like we take it back to that higher level thinking. So we validate where we're at, our thoughts and feelings, and then like ask ourselves a question that's going to access that higher level thinking. And that can be really helpful. Okay. Also play around with them. Like those thoughts that I threw out may sound awful to you. So feel them out in your body. So for me, when I feel those things, it feels empowering, or it feels accepting, or it feels loving, right? But to you, it may feel really awful. And if that's the case, don't use that, right? So you have to go back into this somatic feeling in your body. So maybe closing your eyes and saying the thing to yourself, and then seeing how that feels. And if that's something you want to use, write it down, right? And like if you need to tweak it a little bit, be like, it's not quite right, not quite right. Right. But try and keep some kind of simple so that, because a lot of times some things get really big and convoluted, and then we don't remember what we were actually going to say to ourselves. So think about that. Okay. Another thing that can really help is spending time with people that treat you with respect and kindness. So I know a lot of times people who come in and they're like, I just am really harsh. A lot of times they're in a family situation or a friend situation where people are not being very nice to them. Okay. And if that's you, it may be time to step away from those people if it's financially possible for you. I know that that's not possible for everybody, but if you can, you need to make that transition. I don't want you around people that are going to be mean to you. It's really hard to treat ourselves nice when we're being bombarded with people who are not being nice to us, okay, that are not respecting us. So I highly encourage you to step away if you can and find community that will support you and your dreams. So I think in person is ideal. I just think that it's best for us as human beings. But if that isn't possible, I totally understand. I live in a small place where it can be hard. But you can find online communities. Some may require you to pay some money. And I know that's not ideal, but we live in a capitalistic society where a lot of things are very transactional. We have to pay to be part of groups. And so if you can find one that's free, great, but be okay if you're like, what is this that I need? And maybe it's even therapy, right? Paying for those types of things, or coaching, right? It's realizing that sometimes we have to use our resources to be part of a group. And it's not ideal. I know that, right? Like people think of it as like paying for your friends, but sometimes that's what we need in the beginning. And then we can form those friendships. So, like networking groups have been really beneficial to me because then I can find like-minded people. And I know that we're just going there to meet people, right? I'm an introvert. And so meeting people can be very scary for me. And so I totally understand if you're an introvert, but when I'm in a group where it's like, oh, we're coming together to meet each other, then that can be really helpful. It still can be awkward and I still have to have a little bit of courage and I have to breathe through those hard emotions, right? So that I can make space for those things. But it's also very like reassuring, like they may think I'm weird, but at least this is what I'm here for. This is what I paid to be part of this group for. I wouldn't suggest paying a ton of money. I never do because I think there's a lot of really great groups out there, but there are costs that incur with networking. And so that's why it does cost money, right? It's one of those things where, you got to pay for the place, you got to pay for the people who run the thing. There's so many different things. So like I said, sometimes it costs money. Sometimes there's other areas where you can just like meet up with friends. And that's a great option too. I know that there's some apps out there where it's like, you can meet groups of people. That's more in like city type areas from what I've seen. So that might, benefit some people over the others, but definitely look into that as well. So it might just be people hanging out at a local coffee shop or whatever. Okay, so I know this can be scary. Trust me, I know. I totally get it. But that's where we work on being courageous. That's where you can come and get coaching, right? And this relationship, right? It's a little bit different because it's more of a professional relationship versus a friendly relationship. But it's one of those things where we can learn different things about and we can grow from those relationships. Like I said, finding those relationships, even if it's like a therapist or whatever. So, lastly, I want to talk about gratitude. Gratitude is always a great place to come back to. Make a list of the things you like and value about yourself. All right. Okay. It can be off the wall. It can be big things, little things, whatever. Maybe it's like, I love this thing about myself that most people don't even know, right? So think of new things, challenge yourself, do it daily, write down a list of just a few things. That can really help to start solidifying yourself. Like you're starting to find evidence to prove that, to counteract all of the negative criticisms that we have in our head. So, I said lastly, but I want to talk about weaknesses becoming strengths or weaknesses as strengths. So one of the things I like to do is I like to be grateful for my weaknesses and I like to see how they are actually really good strengths. So for me, like things like lazy, and I've talked about this before in the past, I always talk about I'm lazy, but I also see how that it has benefited me in my life, how it's been really good for me. And I look at those types of things and how I can have gratitude for that. So amazing, something to definitely do. If gratitude for your body, if you have negative thoughts about your body, it can always be helpful to look at all the different parts of your body and what they do and be grateful for those and start to see how that helps you get through life. Okay, so these thoughts, these negative criticisms, being mean to ourselves may not go away. I always want to say that they may not go away. We're human beings. They're in there. They're probably going to come back, right? But we can always choose the next thought. So we might have a thought like, I'm not smart enough to do this, or why am I so lazy, or what's wrong with me, right? And when we can see those thought patterns, that's when we can interrupt them breathe through them, be kind to ourselves in the next thought. Okay. Right. Breathe, ground yourself, find a place of peace within. And then that's when we can access that higher level thinking that I've been talking about, asking ourselves some really good questions, maybe have some written out thoughts that we have on hand. So we're ready to go to those when we are. And, it's okay, but just keep working on it because it's something that's going to keep coming up over and over again until, I don't know, I'm not sure when it stops. Sometimes, like I've talked about in the last podcast, sometimes those things go away right away. And sometimes they stick around and we just have to keep working on them. And that is okay. So hopefully this helps. Helps you to be a little bit kinder to yourself, gives you some tools to help you through that. Also, I offer one-on-one coaching. So feel free, there'll be links in the show notes. You can come and get a free consultation with me. Or if you are looking for small group coaching, it's a little bit more affordable. You can come and do that as well. If it's open, if the group is open, you can do that. And yeah, like I said, links in the show notes. Hopefully this helps, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.